Welcome to the Learning to Die podcast.
I'm Ian Doonican.
And I'm Kieran O'Regan.
How do I live when I know I must die?
We explore areas of philosophy, psychology, martial arts, culture, existential risk, history, society, religion, science, and anything else that seems of interest and relevance to answering that question.
We can only hope that some of what we learn might be of benefit to you too. Namaste, sapiens.
I'm reading a fucking excellent book at the moment. I've had it for ages, but I only started it this week.
What is it called?
I think you would really get a kick off it. It's called Dominion by Tom Holland. It's about the role of Christianity in the Western world.
Oh, I've heard of that, Dominion. I'll add that to the list as well. Man, I'm seriously going down a rabbit hole here. I could I'm not sure what's it's actually a bit confronting doing this work.
What you mean?
Because so what's happened here, like the more you read Becker and Nietzsche and Jung, and then you start listening to podcasts or lectures on these topics, and the more you start listening, the more you kind of get nearly slightly obsessed, right? And you start chasing rabbits down holes, and you start relating it back then to like Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy and different sort of things. And I think to myself, I don't know, man. The more I think about this, the more religious I might be becoming. It's quite profound. Like, you know, like you listen to all this stuff and you're like, really? All these different things. You start listening to those lectures on Ion by the Uber Boyos. You start reading stuff and you're jumping from Jung, because I'm jumping from Jung to Nietzsche to Becker to Orwell at the moment, and I'm starting to see lots of different things. And you sort of you do that and you're like, I don't fucking know. Like,
especially when you see ideas converge.
That's what gets me.
Like from seemingly disparate thinkers. Like, especially what's fast, like one of the strangest ones. Strangest, but so there's an era that I really want to put more time into studying. A particular era, which is like the pre-Socratic Greek era, with guys like Heraclitus.
That's in that book I'm reading, that Dream of Reason. That's the first part is all about that, and Pythagoras and all those guys, and you're just like, what the fuck? They're talking about birth and death and rebirth and energy. And
think about that though, how fascinating that is, because that's the same time period that in that part in Greece, and then at the same time, Confucius and particularly Lao Tzu and Buddha were also doing their thing at the same time. And you have like Heraclitus, for example, there's a line by him where he talks about, there's two lines by him that are basically, you could think of as Buddhist or Taoist as well. One of them is, he says, war is the father and king of all things. And he's referring to conflict, but like friction between ideas. So he's like, it's like a kind of a yin and yang based kind of idea. And then another one he has is like, he says, like, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is never the same river and he is never the same man. And that's, think about that as the Buddha, nothing has any, like Buddha, one of the three marks of existence in Buddhism, there's like, you know, obviously there's the attachment is suffering, life is suffering. Then there's the other two are no self, because there isn't anything stable across time. And that impermanence is the way of the universe. Everything is constantly in flux. So then, that's basically the same. It's like those second two concepts, like no man is the same, no man ever steps in the same river, because he's never the same man and the river is never the same either. And that's the same thing as everything is constantly in flux and there isn't any self. There's no stable self that's fixed across time. So you have thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away. You have thinkers that all of a sudden, in a very narrow period of time, had this kind of convergence of ideas. And
but here's the thing, Karen, was it a convergence of ideas or was it just the expression of the same idea? So, for example, there, and nobody obviously knows, but there well, there's some kind of speculation, I suppose would be the right word, that Jesus may have been a Stoic, or vice versa. Did Jesus influence the Stoics? Or, sorry, not Jesus. Jesus, look at me. That's Friday afternoon, you see, wrecked from the week. Buddha, sorry. The relationship between Buddhism, Stoicism, and Taoism, with the Tao Te Ching is so similar that it's not like it's. If you pick up meditations and read it through a Buddhist mindset, it's very Buddhist. You pick up a Buddhist passage and read it through a Stoic mindset, it's very Stoic. Like it's just, it seems to be too similar, and all around that same period of time as well. So was that just the philosophy of the time? Was that just an expression of different people? Was it the same thing? I don't know. There's lots of similarities, like you're saying. It's weird. And is it convergence of an idea or an expression of a similar ideology at the same time, and just expressed in different countries or different forums?
Yeah. I think it's this. I think I'd be kind of the. See, when you look at it, there's a field called neurotheology, which is the neuroscientific study of religious experience. And it was founded by this guy, Andrew Newberg, I think was one of the founders of this field. And they'll take people and do, I'm not sure what the exact technology is, but they're able to look at electrical activity somehow in the brain during religious experience. So I've written about this, but I haven't published anything on it yet.
There's lots of work on this in University of Wisconsin, particularly around meditation states. You know, for example, if you want to talk about that, an actual fact, and the Sleep for Performance seminar, I have a Buddhist monk coming on talking about this.
Cool. Because the thing about it is that it seems to be quite similar brain states between Buddhist practitioners that are meditating, Sufi Islam mystics. Yeah. So Sufi is a certain form. You're familiar with Sufi?
I'm familiar with Sufism. Yeah. That's another one we'll have to break down under the Sufism.
I know so little about that. Actually,
so do I. That's why I'd like to get into it.
It could be cool to get into it via Rumi, that lad that I quoted in the first episode.
I've read some of Rumi's quotes.
More his stuff. And I must do the same because I've only read bits and pieces, and just fragments of some of his stuff. Be cool to actually dig into it, a body of work on his. And then also Franciscan nuns that can chant themselves into a trance. And the brain states all look really similar. And the language that they use to describe it all sounds really similar. It's like a loss of self, a surrender to something outside of yourself. The boundaries between you and the outside world disappear. They're like so. I kind of think of it like it's like if I use religious language, the experience of the divine in that kind of a sense, which is this total. This what people are for thousands of years have been using, meeting the divine, let's say, or encountering it, or being it, or becoming it, or melting with it, or absorbing it. That it's the same phenomenology, it's the same experience, but there's all these different attempts, like cultural flavors, to try and articulate the experience. Because then we can only use the language that we have and the concepts that we have to try and impart our experiences. And that's only ever imperfect. So I suppose what's really interesting with the likes of that particular era, they call it some historians call it the axial age, is that particular window of a few hundred years in and around Socrates, basically, a couple hundred years each direction.
But then you start thinking about, like, Ion, and Ion's been 21 generations, and then an Ion which ion are we in now when it's like a big changing and different things happening. The other one I've been thinking about lately is this this whole thing between the logos and the eros, which is like the yin and yang, right? The logos being the logic or the reasoning or the rationale, and eros being, for want of a better word, like the muse or the whatever that is out there, like the force in Star Wars, right? So what is that? And that's very feminine, and the logos is very masculine and rational. And so thinking about that on an individual level, and then you're reading there like in Becker, and Rank talks about the fact that we've lost that kind of eros or that connectivity or that collective consciousness that Jung talks about. We've kind of lost that connection, and that psychology has been this birth of scientific rationale so man could understand himself. But ever since we really went this way, has man really improved? Because now man has to find meaning within himself, and there's no meaning. And like what Nietzsche said, the dead, God is dead. The further we move away from spirituality, religion, are we really improving as people? This is what I've been pondering the last couple of days, because I think there might be something in this where we don't have that collective consciousness. We don't have a shared humanity, like you were saying the other day. And I feel like this might be something that is missing in the hearts of people these days, because science has become the new God. And we've gone way more towards the logos as opposed to the eros. And we've lost that completely. And on an individual level, I would say I've lost that.
The thing with, so I'm particularly interested in this exact question, and trying to even use language for it is hard. That's why those Greek words are class, because so what happened with the Enlightenment, according to, so there's like this historian Isaiah Berlin who wrote about the kind of counter-Enlightenment reaction called the Romantic Era, and I haven't read his book, but Ian McGilchrist has this book, The Master and His Emissary. And in that, he basically has this unbelievable chapter on the Enlightenment that a lot of it kind of lines up with Becker's take on the Enlightenment as well. But he quotes Isaiah Berlin in it, and basically talking about because the Enlightenment, you can think of it as, there's so many different takes on it, but a lot of what the kind of motivation seemed to be was trying to get out from underneath power, religious kind of an oppressive kind of a power structure, because where the church couldn't be questioned and this kind of stuff, and there's this attempt to kind of have, moving towards kind of more autonomy. So the way that they viewed knowledge was basically along the lines of a question. This is kind of the Enlightenment take on knowledge, is that a question isn't actually a question unless you can answer it. And the answer isn't even really an answer unless it can be understood. And then you have to be able to transfer that knowledge. It's that kind of a thing. So think about it in terms of the Enlightenment take on knowledge is that it's something that can be transferred. And this is my kind of, this is an opinion that I kind of would have taken from, when influenced by, from Becker and Ian McGilchrist in The Master and His Emissary. And Becker particularly pointed to the Enlightenment focus on logic. But the thing about logic is that logic is transferable. Like if I give you if I just build a logical argument, a way of putting this actually is you can just use a really you can use really powerful emotions like love or hate, right? Or anger. If I try to explain to a robot, let's say there's a robot that's made, and I try and use logical, physiological realities and biological realities to explain love or hate or anger to a robot, an artificial intelligence thing. Let's say if that thing is even, or even another person who's never experienced those emotions, that could even exist, right? But and let's say there's an artificial intelligence robot that's capable of actually, and it's actually conscious. Let's say at some point that it somehow it's actually able to experience things. It's not just a toaster, and that thing can't know what it feels like to experience love simply by understanding the biochemistry involved and the neurobiochemistry involved and the neurocorrelates and everything. So we can, so like what's transferable is the knowledge, like, so in Greek, there would have been different words for knowledge depending on the type of knowledge. So there would have been something like episteme, which is kind of, you could think of it like, it's the etymological root word for epistemology. That's maybe something like essentially theoretical knowledge. Techne would have been something like technical knowledge. So how to, like an IKEA instruction manual, like how to put something together. Like you don't need to know how the bolts work to put a fucking table together if the instruction manual says so. You don't need to know how leverage and everything forces work, or the material science involved, whatever. But techne and episteme are both transferable. Whereas something like another Greek word would be gnosis, Gnosis, which is kind of an experience of the divine.
Yeah.
And that's not transferable. I can't, no matter what language I use, I can't impart to you experiences that I've had on psychedelics or in meditative states, and same for you.
Yeah, so that's like the eros and the logos thing. One is like, that's basically your support. What I'm saying is about, because the logos is so rational and so, like you're saying, transferable, and people can understand it. And then it's a bit like in science, we can put up a presentation, I can show you results. I can say to you, Kieran, X amount of people have ran X amount of meters in a time that ranged from X to Y, and it was statistically significant with this p-value, and you understand that language, that's transferable, and you know that body of data, and you can bring that and work on it and so on. And that's my point. I think we've gone so far, and that's from me as a scientist, and you as well as a scientist. I have realized that in the last few days, reading Becker, bits of Jung, listening to some online lectures, pondering these thoughts, that I'm 95% on the logos and very little on the eros. And as a human society, we've evolved with the logos and the eros over thousands of years. And like that, we've let the eros go. I've purposely let the eros go. I've pushed it out of my life as an adult. Fuck the church, fuck spirituality, fuck all this stuff. That's not relevant to me because of the bullshit around it. But if you sit back and look at it, why do you have to be involved with an institution? You don't. You can be with the eros as a person. That's the great thing about it. And that's, I think, why I was attracted to Buddhism and Taoism, because there's no central command and control with Buddhism, not like with the Pope or whatever it might be in the Catholic Church. And so, and people have all had different experiences with churches, right? So we could sit here and go through everybody's experience, with the Catholic Church or other. But you can tap in to that eros yourself. That's the beauty about it, to the muse, to the life force, to the energy, whatever it is, through different methods. And that's what I think, thinking about over the last couple of days, that all these different religions are. And if you want, you can use them all to tap in. Because fundamentally, at the end of the day, when you look across them all, the pathways are very similar with the precepts in Buddhism, the 5 or 9 precepts that you take, or the 10 commandments. Very, very similar. So they're all kind of pathways to live a good life, to connect with the eros. Or what you did, DMT, you took the fucking bullet train to the eros.
And I think there's another word as well that I only learned from Becker, and I haven't gone down into the rabbit hole at all, which is agape, which is kind of like a merger with love, kind of a surrender to a loving merger to something bigger. And I haven't explored that word, but this is the thing. It's like the kind of Western Enlightenment kind of model it has been unbelievably useful in so many different ways. Like it's evidenced in something like it took 300,000 years to get to 1 billion people just after 1800, but because of innovations in science and engineering and medicine and food production, everything, it took 200 years to get to just nearly 8 billion people. So there's massive benefit, and also it's provided a toolkit to undermine dogmatic statements from religion as well. So like dogmatic statements the problem with so much, if you think about, so if I dial it back before I go into that tangent a bit, but basically I couldn't agree with you more that there's a hyper focus on knowledge that is transferable in our society, and not enough focus on what is actually most important, which is what it feels like to experience something.
Yeah.
But the real problem is when those things dip into each other's territory. So this is where shit gets really messy. So where you have someone like, let's say, I'll use an example. So I worked in a nightclub for years, bouncing, right? And yeah. and you think it would think it wouldn't be abnormal for me to have to deal with some lads, probably most nights, that are drunk or just absolutely clueless when it comes to women and behave like creeps, right? And sometimes eventually they're just so inappropriate, or they're aggressive or whatever, and they have to be chatted to or gotten rid of. So the problem is, right, let's say you have a nightclub with 1,000 people, half male and female, and let's say if 1% of the males are absolutely clueless lads that are behaving in a way that's make women really uncomfortable, and there's 5 guys then in that room amongst 500 women, and over the course of a 3-hour night, let's say from 11ish, half 11ish, 12ish till half 2, those 5 guys can do an untold amount of damage to the reputation of males at large.
Oh yeah.
5 guys, 500 women, 3 hours to make a mess of things. And then you can have women in that go home after that night that have been hassled repeatedly by the same fella, or a few fellas have been hassling them and being inappropriate throughout the night.
Yeah.
That you can have that woman then go home, and it's her intuitions aren't set up to recognize that was 2 or 3 out of 500, because the experiences may have been so uncomfortable that our intuitions aren't set up to work in terms of percentages and proportions. We're set up with things like negativity bias to skew us toward the remembering the things that were uncomfortable or bad. So then the problem is when it dips in. So then if you hear phrases like all men are creeps, or fuck it, I hate men, or Jesus, that nightclub is awful, or whatever. And then you have what it was like to experience something crossing over with the more logical. This is where it gets bad, is you have the experience thing crossing over into the logical realm, because they're making statements then about all men or most men or men are awful or whatever, based on an experience with less than 1% of a room full of men. And the same thing can happen the other way around. Whereas if you go all on the logic side of things and you just acknowledge, let's say, like we were talking about in the last video around the realities of this kind of, we talked about some of the police violence stuff in that previous chat in the US, based on the kind of stats that I went into and gone down, is that there are people who've had horrendous experiences with cops, and that experience isn't devalued just because it's an anomaly. But the problem is we can't devalue their experience in any way. We shouldn't, because it's not representative of the norm, and it's it's an anomaly in terms of whatever the amount of total attempted arrests versus those that go wrong versus those that go very wrong, the tiny proportion. So then in that circumstance, but the same thing can happen here as in the nightclub with the women, is if those people who've had the horrendous experiences with police then start thinking that that's what police behave like, and then start having quote like defund the police and disband the police and all police or cops are evil and kill all cops and all these signs that were being held up in George Floyd protests, then that's, again, it's a feeling thing interfering with the logic. So the problems become when people either have a logical argument and use that to discredit an emotional based one, or an emotion based one and use it to discredit a logical one. But if they stay in their own lane and help each other and assist each other, that's what we want. But it's when we start making statements of epistemics, or statements of, basically, if we start making epistemological statements based on feelings,
Mhm.
or we make, let's say, eros-based statements based on logic, that's when we fuck things up.
Yeah, when you got that crossover. A classic example of this actually was a few years ago on Joe Rogan's podcast. He had Sam Harris on, and then he had, I think he was recording like 2 back to back, and Hannibal Buress, comedian and actor, came in, and they started talking about, and this was before Black Lives Matter started last year, and they started talking about violence in, African American neighborhoods, whatever the correct terminology is, or in these areas. And Sam started going very much on the logos. Well, the data shows, and it's really only a small percentage of overall males. And of course, Hannibal, who grew up in those suburbs, was like fuck it is. You don't know, dog. He's like, you don't know what I was like. You don't know what it is. So there's a feeling, a lived experience. Because if you're in the middle of that, you're not worried about the proportional bias or the statistics or the percentage or the sampling rate. You're like, this is fucking bullshit. There is cop cars screaming up and down here at 3:00 in the morning. There's violence, there's drugs, there's people without parents. You're not worried about the statistics. You're not looking at a metric board and like going, well, we're up 2 points today or down 2 points. You're like, this is fucking bullshit. Something needs to happen. And that's that eros, that feeling, that lived experience with that connection with that. But then Sam, who, wealthy, educated, sitting back from the luxury of his armchair, looking at the data, going, well, it is a problem, but it's not really that big of a problem. So it's like, it's that classic thing, like what you're saying there about that feeling. And I think that might be the source of conflict with people. We use too much rationality as opposed to trying to connect with people. And
or the other side,
we use too much feelings and emotion without any data to back it up. And this is maybe why males and females argue, because I think males go more towards the logos, not towards the feelings. And so we never ask, a female how they're feeling, or encounter that feminine side. And again, it's like that yin and yang, isn't it? That male and female thing. So yeah, it's been an interesting couple of days contemplating, like jumping from Becker to Jung and to Nietzsche, listening to some different things. And as always, Kieran, like with this work that we're doing here, it's self-improvement and self-development of ourselves first and foremost, and recording the chats, like you said in the intro, to throw out some nuggets there if people can latch on to, or bits of fruit. And it's a bit scary when you start picking on this stuff. And your old mate there, Danny Lennon, messaged me last night, and about getting up one of our podcast episodes, and he was saying like that you told him like to be careful when you start reading Becker. And it's true, because once you go down the slide, man, there's no coming off till you get to the end of it, I think. And I feel like you're going down that rabbit hole, and so it's kind of weird. Now, I do have a small segue as well off of this. Do you remember our dolphin story with Greg Bennick, and you went from dolphins to Nazis?
Yeah.
I got another story for you today. Complete opposite story in the same place. And I thought you met the minute it happened. So we're down there this afternoon swimming, and we get in the water at 11:30, 11:45 in the day. And it's winter here. So the water's a bit cold. We got wetsuits on. And it's pretty murky. Like you can't see fuck all right in the water. It's murky.
Yes, you're shark-proof, so with the wetsuits on.
Oh yeah, shark-proof. Yeah, shark bay. So it's a bit murky. Can't see much. It's a bit cold. But there's a bit of swell. It's a bit kind of towy underneath, So you got to work a little bit. But it's doable for swimming. We swim down to the wall and back at Cottesloe. It's 2 Ks. So we're swimming along. I don't know, maybe 100, 150 meters in. I see, because I bilaterally breathe, so I breathe to both sides. But every maybe 4 or 5 times I breathe, I'll just look up to make sure I'm going in the right direction, because there's like you have to kind of sight off different markers, land markers. So I'm swimming along and I see this thing fucking humping up out of the water in front of me. So I immediately stop and tread water, and I see it kind of humping up again. So I've learned now, instead of calling out because people can't hear you in the water, the 2 girls are with me, I just splashed them with lots of water, and that kind of got their attention, and they stopped. And so one of them goes, "What's wrong?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "There's something just over there to the front of us. I see it humping in out of water. Looks like it might be a dolphin or something else." But I knew it wasn't a shark. So the other person that was with us, was 3 of us. She goes, "What's wrong?" She stopped. So there's something over there, not sure what it is. Might be a dolphin. Next minute, it humps up again. Oh my God, what is it? We all kind of just like look at, like, kind of just like rotate to our right because it's going like past us. Next minute, it comes up and it looks at us. It's a big fucking seal. And he looks at us like a dog, looking like left to right, like, what the fuck are you guys doing? And next minute, he goes back underneath. I burst out laughing. One of the girls starts screaming, starts swimming to the shore. I start swimming like a fucking idiot too. And then I stopped there about 4 strokes. What am I swimming for? And I went, "Stop. What are you swimming for?" Because I thought maybe she had seen something behind the seal that I didn't see. And she goes, "Oh, the seal, aren't they aggressive?" And I went, "No, I don't think so." But a few weeks beforehand, when we were swimming with dolphins, she didn't give a fuck. The dolphins would have frightened the shit out of me more than the seal. So we swam down anyway. We're all kind of like hyper vigilant. And then we get down there, turn around to come back. And there were some other people in swimming as well. And they were like, "Did you see the seal? Did you see the seal?" They're like, "Yeah, frightened the shit out of me." One woman goes, "I'm not swimming back up. It's too murky." It's frightened the shit out of me. So she walked back up along the beach. So we got back up, and of course, we're all kind of giggling. But it's interesting because after this person had seen the seal and screamed, and I was like, "What the fuck you got, you idiot?" She then went into this unfucking controllable convulsions of laughter. So she couldn't swim because she was laughing so hard. So it's a bit like the dolphin story. And then we were laughing about it. And a bit like I was saying about this will all be gone in 100 years. And we're talking about that with the roof falling in the house. The house won't be there. I mean, I just started laughing. It's that kind of encounter with something that makes you feel alive because the threat of like damage or death is there, that you kind of giggle. Remember I was telling the story about being in the bunker as well in the military and just laughing? Yeah. It's that kind of sick, perverse, like, I don't know what it is.
You get the glimpse of the absurd. That's the lid lifts, like the fucking the lens lifts
comes
off,
up,
and you get a real
So I thought you'd like that story there today as a bit of a follow on from that one. So that was quite interesting.
Especially because she realised the absurdity of what went down. You know, like
and we were all laughing.
That lens lifts, like.
So yeah, it's pretty funny. It was nice though. Nice going to the ocean today, you know. So we're in lockdown at the moment. It gets lifted tonight. So, you know, we weren't allowed to travel more than 5 k's from our house, but we all travel more than 5 k's because I don't give a fuck. Because I'm not this bullshit. Like, you can travel around to go to work, you can travel around to do other things, but you can't travel around to go and swim in the ocean to do a health activity. The police were actually scanning number plates here yesterday to see where people were living. How bizarre is that, man?
That's so creepy.
That's the word, creepy. Yeah, scanning number plates at the beach and giving people warnings. No fines were issued. That's creepy, isn't it? That's weird, and people think it's acceptable. And yeah. Anyway, podcast for another day.
So you see, there was a point I just wanted to. I might actually even do it. I maybe even like take pictures of these pages and send them on to you if you'd like. But the thing with logic is that, and it's a really important.
The thing with logic, 40 years later.
Yeah, because I meant to make this point. So I never made a note of it anywhere, and I missed it. Is that logic is unable to justify itself. Like, logic isn't self-referential. So like, you can't use a logical argument to justify the need for logic.
Yeah.
No, like logic, there needs to be an emotional intuit. There needs to be an a priori acceptance or intuition that logic is actually something that's worth using. And then once the ball is kicked off, the show is on the road. So logic is actually only useful if it has a direction. Logic or rationality. Like logic or rationality could be captured in that logos kind of a concept in Greek, not the logos like Christian logos, and there's different kind of flavors of it, or the Stoic logos around the life force, but like the kind of that ancient Greek version it's used, which is the root word for logic and rationality. And then there's another Greek word, an Aristotelian one called nous, N-O-U-S, and that relates to reason, where reason and rationality are different things, where reason has an intuit or an emotional, like when someone's being reasonable, they're not necessarily being just rational. You know, because there's other strands of information that are also emotional or intuitive that we can't necessarily articulate. But when someone is being rational, they can articulate the whole argument, or logical, they can articulate the sequence and transfer it. So reason has a component to it that's not transferable, whereas logic or rationality does. So just like in that chat with Buress and Harris, it's like all the knowledge that Harris had was transferable.
Yeah.
But the reason that he was using for that to be the core lens that or the core argument that he had was because he was coming from a certain intuitive emotional place that had a different intuitive emotional place than Buress did with his argument. So then that logic couldn't necessarily map onto Buress because they were coming from different starting points. And what can happen in those situations is people end up can talk past each other, and they can end up kind of arguing past each other because they're actually arguing on different levels. They're arguing, one person is arguing from a place of, as you said, lived experience, and the other person is arguing from a place of that is highly emotionally based, obviously. And then the other person is arguing from a place of a transferable, logically coherent, rational argument. But their reason for using that argument is different for the other person's reason for using theirs. So unless you can come down levels and recognize where you're coming from, where each other are coming from, then we're at risk of just talking past each other because we're not actually meeting. We're not meeting heads like.
And this is like a classic thing in conflict resolution, like, for example. But I think to keep on what we're talking about, this is interesting because if we think about in your mind's eye, on the left-hand side, we have logos, right? The rational thing we spoke about. On the right-hand side, we have eros, the feeling, right? Or the muse and the force. But then there's two others, one coming in from the top and one coming in from the bottom, which I think might be interesting to push onto this as a model. We've got reason or rationality that you spoke about, which is like I would see as being the balance between the two, not just one or the other. But then coming up from the bottom, you've also got kind of Becker's work, which is this fear of death, the denial of death. And I think this is really apt at the moment for COVID because, for example, in Western Australia, we have a lockdown for 4 days for 4 cases of COVID. So the rational logic part of that is like, we don't have a problem. We have 4 people out of 2 million, 0.00000, like, you know what I mean? Prevalence rate, right? Right. So you look at that logically. Then on the other side of it, you look at the feeling. COVID's killing everybody. The world, half the world, I've seen people write comments like half the world is dying from COVID when the actual fatality rate is less than 1%. Now, if you're a person in that situation right now and you've had a partner or a parent or somebody close to you die from COVID and you hear me say that, you're like, fuck you. My dad died, my sister died, and I fully understand that. But that's a classic example that we all share in today in the world that we can look into. And we have the logic on one side and we have the feeling on the other side from the lived shared experiences. But coming into that is the inability to rationalize or reason between the two. And we have this denial of death that we've been speaking about before, because we have this kind of thing going on here, particularly in Western Australia, where people think they're going to live forever. And now they put all their faith into one person. And so with the God is dead thing, right, by Nietzsche, with the lack of a hero in our life, or us not having heroic adventures or heroicism, you know, and I think it was Zerberg or one day was talking about the fear of death and the lack of, like, you know, heroic adventures or apotheosis, this kind of culmination in your life of heroic events. Without that, then you may want to transfer that to somebody else. Hence why Jesus might have got popular, or people love Jordan Peterson, or, you know, people love a rock band, or people put their faith in these things. And what's happening at the moment, I feel, in Western Australia is it's nearly this North Korean style thing, not being forced, but actually volunteered. The state premier, he will save us. We've had this 90-something% like agreement to vote him into power. Our Lord and Savior, keep us safe. Like, people write on Facebook and other social media, thanks for keeping us safe, Mark. As if he's out there with a fucking cricket bat knocking away the coronavirus. God bless you, Mark, doing the Lord's work. God bless you, Mark. You're the best. Only you can keep us safe and keep out the deadly disease. The logic says no person in the world has ever, or community or society has ever knocked out a virus completely. Sooner or later, guys, like I sang in the intro episode, 5 to 1, baby, 1 in 5. No one here gets out alive. It's going to fucking happen. You're going to die. It's going to happen. And the virus is going to get into our community sooner or later. You can't keep it out forever. Vaccinations or no vaccinations, you're going to get it. Yes, it will lower the probability of dying. So this is this whole thing about logic and feeling. And when you talk to people rationally about it, people are like, oh, like kind of roll their eyes. I was talking to somebody today about it, and they turned and said, well, why are people then just accepting it? And I went, well, how the fuck do I know? I'm not coordinating the resistance. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing. This isn't like an episode of V from 1980s. So it's interesting that when we look at the logic part of it, we look at the eros or the feeling part of it, bring in reason and rationality to try to bridge the two, but then coming up from the bottom, we look at, the denial of death, because people think here they're going to live forever. That's what I think. I feel like they're acting like. So that's kind of what I've been playing around with the last few days. And sometimes I wish I never fucking started this podcast with you.
Yeah, because I don't know what it's like to be in these decision-making positions.
And I don't envy them, yeah. I do not envy them.
But also what I don't envy is, because imagine, okay, like I've been trying to wrestle with this myself, because there's been some really uncomfortable decisions made by decision makers here in Ireland as well. And I can't help but wonder what traits does someone need to have to be able to successfully rise throughout government bureaucracies. And they're the kind of traits that I'd imagine are not going to be the kind of person that's going to rock the boat. Like I can't help but think that the kind of people that are going to successfully be able to rise through the ranks of government bureaucracies are going to be those that are able to conform, that are able to tick the boxes, that are able to keep the head down, that are able to avoid.
I agree.
They're able to avoid playing devil's advocate, for example, right? Do you ever come across this concept of Asch conformity?
I've heard of it, but I'm not enough familiar. Don't know much about it.
So they're basically these studies on people's willingness to go with the flow of the tribe, or go with the flow of the group, even in spite of being obviously wrong. So they're the kind of experiments where, let's say there's 3 lines over here, A, B, C, and B is.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes. I remember it now.
This one over here.
Yeah. I think we discussed this before. Yeah. But repeat it. Yeah.
Because what you end up with, because I've kind of built on this a bit, I've been playing with it, is that, so imagine if you have a random population section, and basically the way it works is there's 6 people around the table, 5 or 6 people around the table. This is a kind of a basic overview of the kind of experiment. And 5 of those people are going to be actors, and the 6th person is the test subject. But the 6th person doesn't know that the other 5 are actors. So then the experimenter will come in and say, okay, they'll do a load of questions. And one of the questions will be like, which of these lines is the same length as this line over here? So there's 3 lines, A, B, C. And A is obviously longer, B is obviously the same size, and C is obviously shorter than the one over here, like the test line. And if the other 5 people say, oh yeah, it's A, obviously, then by the time it gets to the experiment, the test subject, it's something like 75% of the time, they'll just go with the group in spite of the fact that they're giving an obviously wrong answer. So then if you take that as a random population section, right? And then if you think about that as Asch conformity at the level of random population in a kind of an inconsequential area that's not very heated politically, it's not heated reputationally or anything, with people that they don't know. And then you take that and then you think about, well, what does it take to get to key decision-making positions of bureaucracies? And you're like, well, they're the kind of people that are able to just not rock the boat, not cause hassle, not play devil's advocate, not say no, not assert themselves against the group, then you end up with a selection for people that are more likely to conform. So then you end up, by the time you get to those situations, you have people around the table making a decision in decision-making, mid-level or upper-level government bureaucratic situations that are basically, the likelihood of groupthink is that much higher because of what it took to get to that situation in the first place.
Yeah.
So then it's almost like, whereas instead of it being Ash conformity, I was just kind of playing around with it, and well, it's actually like mass Ash hyper conformity, because it's en masse. It's not just one person conforming to actors who know that they're lying. It's one person conforming to a group of people that are all afraid to question. So then you end up with its mass Ash, or I just call that MASH, and instead of conformity, it's hyper conformity, because it's like a concentrated, ramped up version of an unwillingness to question the status quo.
Oh man, I've seen this
against the grain.
I've seen this for years. I've seen this in the military. I've seen it in business. And I think one of the benefits of now, not working in a company is that you don't have to. Like, a guy pulled me aside when I was working in a mining company years ago in a corporate role, and he pulled me aside and he said, I don't think really you're that suited to going into an operational role to lead people here. I went, why? He goes, you're more like a kind of a change type person. You're good at like stimulating people for change. You're good at challenging people. You're good at moving things forward. You're more like a disruptor. I don't think like you're going to be good in an operational leadership role. I think you can do more good in your life doing that. And I was quite put down by it, as in, no, this guy thinks I can't lead and I can't do this. And what he was actually saying to me was, you can't conform. You can't go along with this. You can't lick the ass of your boss and your boss's friends. You can't do this. Like, I remember getting pulled aside as well on the same note by my boss because I took the piss out of his boss in a social setting over a drink. Now, his boss laughed at, we were going back and forth, ribbing one another over something, and it was a bit of a joke. But my boss was like, you can't speak to someone like that that's higher than you in the business, and he's even higher than me. You need to watch yourself. You made yourself and me look stupid. I said, the only person that made himself look stupid was you, and you're being stupid now. Of course, all I was doing was putting fucking nails in my coffin, really, Mm-hmm. But it's that same thing to your point, Kieran. That's why, like, at school, when I ask questions as well, never suited at school because I ask questions. So some people are like that. Maybe I'm just an antagonist, a disruptor. Maybe that's just who I am. And maybe that's why I enjoy doing science. That's why I enjoy doing consulting work. We get brought in to help with change. So it suits me in terms of what I'm doing now. I've self-selected for that. But it's interesting because what you've said there, and we'll go back to the coronavirus thing because people can identify with this, is the same thing. You hear people going, oh, when we're all vaccinated, it'll be fine. I'm like, why is that? Oh, because we'll get rid of the virus. Well, vaccinations don't get rid of a virus. They will help reduce transmission. They will help lower the severity if you catch the virus. But the government said, that's not an answer. So it's that ability to, what you're saying there is that conformity to just follow that narrative, right? That groupthink to do that. Oh, the government said if we blah, blah, blah. My boss said blah, 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 blah. And it's like the first thing you hear, people just follow it. It's really bizarre. So this Ash conformity you've spoken about, I think it's evident in social circles. It's evident in business, government. And to some extent, Karen, I think it's evident in research. Because when we have a positive publication bias. When peer review is not blinded two ways, but only blinded one way. So in other words, I might write a scientific paper. Kieran gets selected as a reviewer. I don't know that Kieran has reviewed my paper. It's an independent peer review blind. But Kieran sees my name on the paper. Kieran picks it up and goes, oh, Ian Doonican, that dickhead. I remember him speaking at a conference and he shot me down when I asked him a question, or he made a joke at the bar. I'm going to reject his paper. So, that happens as well. And I know that happens because I've heard people talk about it, where people go, oh, shit that comes out of that lab, I'd never approve a paper out there because he or she is associated with X, Y, and Z. And I've got
There's a line in Nassim Taleb.
So just to finish it off, Karen, sorry, one sec. I've got the great beauty over the last 10 years not drinking alcohol. So when I hear people talking when they're pissed, I hear everything.
You remember the whole lot.
Yeah.
Like, there's a line in one of the Taleb's books, who I'm a big fan of his. He's such a fun writer and really stimulating ideas. But he's got this line where he says that scientists are more loyal to their peers than they are to the truth. Or academics, he said. He said academics are more loyal to their peers than they are to the truth.
I'd fully agree with that. That's a great statement. Yeah.
And that there's that and there's this the kind of conformity, the kind of, and this is what's so bizarre in science as well, because there's a seemingly massive misunderstanding in the way science is communicated, in the way that the endeavor of science as a body, as a field seems to work, which is a kind of a crushing of heretical opinion.
Yeah.
This realization that scientific innovation is only ever heresy against the norm. Like, scientific innovation is always heresy against consensus. You know, like anytime there's a leap or progress, that's a different direction to the norm. It's a different thing to the norm. And even though that's the case, there's still this, and I don't know how many, maybe it's just vocal, maybe it's not most scientists who work, maybe it's just very vocal ones or very kind of conformist ones that happen to reach positions of influence in terms of journal editors or administrators in departments or whatever, that end up being the kind of people who have the voice and who have influence. So I don't know what the skew is, but the sentiment is very much a crushing of attempt to crush heresy. And that was the same when it wasn't even like, that's why fucking Socrates was told to kill himself, or had to die, like had to drink the hemlock, because he was asking so many questions. He was basically being a heretic against the culture in a certain respect, while still also being a follower of the gods of Delphi and everything. But he was asking so many questions. And then whether it was Galileo getting house arrest or Giordano Bruno getting burnt alive, you know, and that was even by the church. And then you ended up with, like, it took 4 odd years for Einstein to really, from my understanding of the history of it, for Einstein presented his general relativity work in 1915, and it wasn't until 1919 that people actually realized he was onto something because of Arthur Eddington's photograph of the eclipse, and it showed the basically this bending of the redshift light spectrum, whatever. I can't remember the exact language, but it basically, a picture of an eclipse added a load of evidence, and it took 4 years because people couldn't really buy into the idea that a fella in their generation was after overcoming Newton's work. You know, there was a kind of a heresy. Another example would be the lab leak hypothesis for the virus. Just to give it a more recent example, is that I was only reading a paper yesterday on the immune system and prolonged immunity as a result of COVID exposures. And that was one of them. It was actually a different one. It was one about gain of function research and danger of lab leaks. And it was a paper from August 2020. But they said in the paper that they were quoting, well, the consensus on this is in August. And they were saying that the consensus seems to be that this is a zoonotic jump and not a lab leak. And then they specifically used the word consensus. And whereas that had never been the case, it was so odd. There wasn't a consensus. Even one of the major people who was pushing, there was a fear there among scientists to talk about it, because according to Alina Chan, who is she's an MIT and Harvard, she's one of the main proponents of the lab leak hypothesis from very early on. She reckoned that it was because people were afraid of being called racist that they didn't want to talk about the lab leak hypothesis, even though scientists all over the world were like, there's something fishy going on here. So then she's one of the main lead signatories on a letter published in the journal Science last month, or in late May. she was one of the lead signatories on this paper calling for serious reinvestigations, not the joke shop that happened earlier this year with the WHO and China doing a joint investigation, and where the WHO sent Peter Daszak to investigate himself and his own mates. So like, this idea of consensus, whereas the body of knowledge was always in favor of, like, there's nothing really new available now. There's a few sprinkles on top of the case, but there's very little new available now that wasn't available June last year. But now all of a sudden the media has flip-flopped. And Facebook at the end of May lifted a ban on discussing the lab leak hypothesis. If up to the end of May, you discuss the lab leak hypothesis on Facebook, you get the post taken down. And if you did it multiple times, you lose your account. So Facebook had taken it upon themselves to be the arbiters of truth and to control what could be discussed in the public commons.
Hence why I have some warnings already myself.
Do you?
Yeah.
And it's bizarre. Like, it's like, how can there's this unbelievable arrogance. It's a misunderstanding of how truth is actually sought.
Yeah.
Which is fire out conjectures, and then any conjecture is on the table at any level, no matter how absurd. And then if it's a good explanation that is low variability, let's try and falsify it. That's how science works. That's how knowledge grows.
No, it doesn't anymore, Karen. That's the problem, because it's all got to do with it's like what you see with everything now. It's like it's about opinion, and it's about feeling, and it's about what you think, and you just throw it out there, and it's not actually based upon some of these things. Like we're talking about the logos and the eros. Some are like fucking so far on the logos, and some things are so far on the eros, like the feeling side, if you want to call it that. Where it's like that video you sent me of that person identifying as a Korean person, to feel like their DNA is Korean. Well, like, I don't even know what to say to that. Like, there's just craziness going on. Like, it's weird. But
the thing in that scenario is I actually, in that scenario, I find that really interesting, because if that's how that, because I kind of think of it as we're all in that, the example there, so it's basically a video of this British kind of influencer or social media personality called Ollie London, who's after getting a load of plastic surgery and getting their face changed to be able to
like a Korean person,
look like a Korean, like gone eye surgery and stuff. And I kind of think of it as, I don't see any harm until the point where people start conflating subjective lived experience with core reality. So if someone thinks, because that person, Ollie London there was able to say, I don't actually have any Korean blood, I don't actually have any Korean genetics, but I feel like it is, and I culturally line up. But where that kind of sentiment, and Ollie even called out the woke mob for attacking her, or I don't even know what their preferred gender pronoun, but attacking them and saying, and just going after them and attacking them for what they're doing. Whereas Ollie's like, look, this is the way I feel. But the problem would come where, and this is kind of this is like a denial of reality. So this is someone who identifies as Korean, but also recognizes the woke mob as this really aggressive, ideological, conformist organization, not even organization, like mob, basically. But the problem is when you start looking at core reality as if that's up to subjective experience as well, like denying biological differences between men and women, saying that sex isn't the binary and that sex is a spectrum, or that biological sex is just a social construct, or saying that it's okay if transgender women compete in the Olympics against actual biological women, in spite of the biological differences that give an innate advantage. So it doesn't even matter I have serious disagreement with the New Zealand athlete that's competing with the fact that a biological male is allowed to compete against biological females. I just have massive issue with that, because it doesn't even matter if this person goes on and wins no medals and comes last. That's still a position in the Olympics that a biological woman couldn't get. I don't care if they win a medal. I'm like, this person is in the Olympics in a division that's not their division, and they have innate advantages, and we either have a women's division or we don't. And if we're going to have it, then we have to be very clear about what a woman is. And what a woman is not a biological woman. It's not a biological male.
I don't think you should be worried, Karen. I don't think you should be worried because everybody that goes to the Olympics this year is getting a medal. Everyone's a winner.
Everyone gets a gold medal.
Everyone gets a gold medal, yeah. Actually, and then, not only that, you get to choose your own medal. So whatever color you like, you get to choose, and everybody wins because just getting here has been an achievement. Well done, everybody.
And they start, and they like cover up the plates and the weightlifting so they don't know what the number is because you can't have quantifiable measures of competence.
That's right. Yeah.
And in the discus throw, they won't use, in the discus and hammer and shot put, in the running, they won't use the stopwatch. And the discus and hammer and the shot put, they won't use measuring tape. And they won't actually figure out where it landed. They're just like, it's everyone gets it.
In actual fact, we won't even fucking have a stadium. We'll just all rock up to Tokyo and we'll all go into a hotel and we'll just get medals and go out to their fucking side.
Yeah. So this is where things get murky. It's like, and it gets really politically heated, but I think if we start to deny core aspects of reality, then we're all standing on quicksand. Like if we start to deny the best explanations we have of what reality is, and it doesn't mean we know the truth, but the best explanation we currently have, to just use the trans thing, is that biological sex is as real a thing as we know of, and is a binary thing, and is a yes or a no. There's gametes that are eggs and there's gametes that are sperm, and there's primary sex characteristics with these gonads that are set up to produce one of the two, or there's intersex, which is like a 1 in 5,000, 1 in 6,000 kind of a murky area, but that's not a third sex. That's just an intersex that's kind of undefinable. And if that's the best explanation given available evidence. If we abandon ship on that and start making up stories about sex being a spectrum and sex even being more than that, being a social construct, and that science is just another meta-narrative that's a social construct that's no different to any other story or religion or ideological thing, then we're adrift into madness then.
But this is my whole thing. This is like we're about to go on a rabbit hole here on postmodernism, which I don't want to do. I think we should keep that for a different day. But this is my whole thing about postmodernism. I don't understand what they're trying to achieve. You want to throw everything out. Everything is a construct. Nothing is real. Nothing is true. So we have no bedrock, nothing to build upon. But science, rationality, religion, philosophy, all these things that got us to where we are today is what got you. And again, it's a bit like, it's what got us to the line here today, where we are now. And it's a bit like, well, if we didn't have any of that, you'd be fucking, I don't know, running around naked under a tree. Like, I don't understand that. And people are talking about these theories again from these privileged positions in these sandstone Ivy League universities wanting to break down society. Well, guys, if you've ever been in a war or done martial art or got a slap in the fucking head, you'd lose your postmodernism very quickly, because without that structure, you'd be fucked. Absolutely fucked. So I don't understand where they want to go or what they want to do. I have no idea what the outcome for postmodernism is. It's like they want to rip everything out and everything is bad. And it's a bit like what you're saying there as well. We just pull the rug out from everything and we see what happens. You want to go into anarchy like that, guys? Good luck with you, because I'm running for the fucking hills. I am playing down here in the sandwich, you fuckers, when you're doing that, because it'll be like fucking Planet of the Apes. People will be ripping each other's faces off. You want to get rid of everything. That's because am I missing it, Kieran? Like, do you know what they want to get over? I have no fucking idea. It scares me, that postmodernism stuff.
There's a part of it, like I'm actually deadly curious. Like, so I have this thing, falsified thinking, which is basically just a word I use. It's a clunky word, but it's a word I use to try and encapsulate the sentiment of trying to find out where I'm wrong and what I'm kind of missing. And there's a certain element of, so I could use kind of Socrates as an example in that. So Socrates had this concept of, I know nothing other than I know nothing.
Mm.
And you could almost think of that as kind of an ancient Greek postmodern statement if taken in isolation. But Socrates also, so I always have a biography of Socrates over there that I'd finished. And according to the way that was explained in that, which I thought was really cool, was that like Socrates wasn't opting from offer. So that's kind of like an epistemics argument and a techne argument. It's about objective transferable knowledge. That's why he was always asking questions, because he was asking questions of himself, trying to get underneath his own arguments, trying to get underneath other people's arguments, trying to get underneath other people's definitions of words and concepts, and eventually confronting people with the fact that they're regurgitating sound bites without actually having an understanding of what they're talking about or understanding the ground that they're standing on. And that's what made people so uncomfortable. One of the things. So
that's exactly what we were just talking about with the COVID situation, for example, in today's world. People just regurgitating stuff that they hear.
Sound bites. But at the same time, Socrates also had a kind of a loyalty to the Temple of Delphi and a loyalty to the kind of divine essence of existence. So he didn't just have skepticism only and a truth-seeking only. He had a truth-seeking epistemics where he was constantly using questions to get underneath arguments, to get underneath statements, to get underneath definitions, to get to the bedrock of understanding. But that was held, encompassed within an overarching sense of loyalty or connection with the divine, in terms of what to him it was the gods of Delphi, the Temple of Delphi. So, or he'd partake in religious festivals and all this kind of stuff. So it was this awareness, it was this ability to hold those two things in tension. That's missing.
Chaos and order.
Yeah, and even also non-transferable experiential divinity. And this is, when I read this, I'd already come to this point in my own writing, and it was actually really cool to come to it for your Socrates, because I was struggling a lot to try and make sense of my own thinking. And I ended up at this place that I've called, which is, there's a kind of somewhat of a postmodern element to it, which is, I kind of think of it as I call it the sacred substratum, which is, if I get right down to the bottom of my understanding, essentially I have this I call it the axiom of the infinite unknown, which is this recognition of what I can know relative to all possible knowable things. So there's a massive asymmetry. There's an incomprehensible asymmetry there between what is possible for me to know and what is possible to know, given all information that has ever existed in the past or will ever exist in the future, from which knowledge could be.
Don't I call that? I call that a fucking panic attack.
But it's actually really, it's the grounds for it. To me, it's the grounds for epistemic humility and the avoidance of dogmatism. Whereas, so then that's that. So on one side of the sacred substratum is, for me, what I've called this sacred, I call it a substratum rather than bedrock, because I don't know if it's bedrock, because I can't, because bedrock is just, if we think about that as the very bottom.
Whereas it's your bedrock. It's relative to you. It's your bedrock.
Yeah, because it's the lowest I can get to, possibly. Yeah. Whereas what that is encompassed with is the fact that to exist at all has a positive valence, so that it feels good to simply exist. You know, like at the base level, even in the experience of psychedelics, meditation states, where the sense of self drifts and drops away, where there's no longer a memory of even having existed, when there's just an experience of experience with no sense of self and no memory of having existed and no sense of awareness of what context this experience is taking place within. It's just pure experience at bedrock, at the bottom. That those two things are like the lowest. They're the furthest it can get to core reality, is that it's preferential to experience. And so that existence itself, conscious experience, is a preferable thing. And then alongside that is an awareness that every single one of my opinions about reality is underpinned by infinite ignorance.
Yeah.
So then that's a kind of a subject-object divide at the bottom, is that experience itself of whatever is preferable, is a good thing. But what it is that I am experiencing, I'm only ever making best guess decisions based on whatever I've come across, because I'm aware, based on available evidence, because I'm aware that infinite ignorance underpins everything. So then from there is where the kind of my even approach towards morality and my approach towards this kind of like agnostic Gnosticism and the life force and what it is to exist and what my motivations might even be and how I can reconcile my own finiteness with the infinity of whatever else is going on.
So it's nearly like a linear regression between these two variables, and you're somewhere in the middle, constantly in this tension between what you know and what you don't know. So you're realizing that you can't ever, know it completely. So it's quite interesting, but it's also kind of builds upon the Dunning-Kruger curve as well, where you get to a certain level of knowledge, and then you think you're you're very low knowledge, but you think you're an expert. But then you start learning more things. You actually become very cognizant of the fact that you are ignorant of that, and that's actually within a subject. So like if you do strength and conditioning PhD, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to be like an expert in strength and conditioning, and I guarantee you by the time you get to the end of the PhD, you're like, I know a lot about a little thing, but I really know fuck all about it anyway. It's because the more you delve into it, the more you realize the less you know. I think that comes out with Hinduism as well, And I think it was a UB40 song as well, wasn't it? The more I know, the less I know about before. Anyway, I like to sing on this. There's some lyrics about that. Like, it basically is the more you try and, learn, the more you realize the less you know. And it's fucking frustrating. That's why I call it a panic attack. Like sometimes when I start reading things and I'm making notes, like I've got notes and notes in books and papers and fucking everywhere, and books to read and blah, 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 lectures to listen to. And in some ways I have to just give up and go, I'm just going to follow my heart and see where I go, not my mind so much, and try and get through books. I'm going to just go. And that's why I jump between things. I can pick up a Carl Jung book, read 4 or 5 pages, put it down, not touch it for a year, and then pick up another book and read 100 pages in 2 days and be like, oh, this is awesome. And it's like what you said to me before about marinating on a few sentences and a few pages. And you're better off juicing those pages for good knowledge as opposed to just getting through it. And I think that's the tension as well. Like you don't want to be like just going through books and reading shite for the sake of it, or listening to lectures or collecting courses or whatever. You've got to follow these lines of interest on this axiom of infinite, like ignorance that you call it. You've got to keep chasing it and knowing, a bit like in martial arts when we talk about the Book of 5 Rings, there is no end. It is a journey. It's continuous learning. It's continuous improvement. But as you move along it, you're actually, as you progress along compared to other people, you're less worried about that and more worried about becoming a better version of yourself, but also been trying to be a little bit better than you were the day before, to use what Jordan Peterson says, but still knowing that the more you do that, the void gets bigger. And that's fucking scary, I think. Because then you start thinking about what is the point of accumulating or acquiring or trying to understand when I'll never get there. And the more I get towards that goal, the further away that goal gets and the bigger the void gets. And then I'm fucking dead. So what's the point?
But that's a very postmodern take.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like that. So that's that's so, and then you go back to Albert Camus and you start rationalizing. Well, what's the point in fucking living then? Why is suicide not like on the table? Why you not go and just top yourself? Because what's the fucking point? And then you start thinking about all that stuff, and then you think, I just pay tax and I pay bills and I'm just an administrator and no one gives a fuck. It's been a long week. But they're the things that will come up in your head.
Yeah, 100%. And I get that, and I've wrestled with this as well, and big time. And I think it comes down to, so like Musashi, to use a line from him, is like a really simple one. He's like, the way is in training.
Yeah.
The way with a capital W. And the way is the Taoist way, the path, the balance of yin and yang, the order and chaos. And that, so it comes down to existence itself, where the idea for me in studying philosophy and in the objectives are twofold, really, in that part of it is because there are useful concepts that feed into being able to better navigate a well-lived life that have served me very well. And then another part is that the process itself of feeling as if I'm gaining a better understanding, in spite of the fact that I know I can never reach an ultimate truth, the process itself is rewarding for its own sake. You know, similarly, it's like the same thing in jiu-jitsu. Like when you're rolling in jiu-jitsu, or it's a good fun roll, and you're in it. It's like it's rewarding for its own sake. That's why people get the black belt and keep training, and there's no end. Because it's the process that's rewarding for its own sake. And then when you encapsulate that within the fact that we can't predict the future, we don't think, we can never know if we get to an ultimate truth in any domain, because infinite ignorance underpins everything. Because even if I use this as an example recently in a video I put out, where it was like, even if there happens to be some kind of unified laws of physics that are determined by one of these unified theories that have come out in recent years, whether it's like Weinstein's geometric unity, or the cellular automaton one by Stephen Wolfram, or I think maybe constructor theory by David Deutsch and his crew over in Oxford, like, which I think is an attempt at unified theory as well, my minimal understanding of physics, is that, like, even if that's the case, we can never know for sure that there isn't knowledge that we can't get access to, or that we haven't yet uncovered. So it's always, to use David Deutsch's own phrase, it's always, every time we learn something new, a better explanation, it's always the beginning of infinity every time. So every time we make a new innovation, that's a new beginning onto infinity. It's a new opening onto infinity every time we make a new innovation. Yeah.
So you're just making blueprints and blueprints.
And then we're getting, so then it comes down to the process itself. You know, that it's not about reaching a particular end goal. Because how often do we reach goals and it's an anticlimax upon having accomplished a particular task?
Heaps, man, heaps.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So then it's the process itself is wherein the reward lies. So then it's like, so even if ultimate truth is inherently unreachable, the process of orientating toward trying to get less wrong in the meantime is where the reward lies for me. And that's how I have been able to avoid nihilism. And I think that's where I kind of have sympathy for, I have such a small understanding of postmodernism. And actually, Jonathan Vervaeke and Jordan Peterson have had a chat recently. Are you familiar with Jonathan Vervaeke? He's a cognitive neuroscientist.
No.
You'll fucking love this conversation. It only came out last week. And Vervaeke talks about how some of the Stoics, I think it might have been Jacques Derrida in particular, toward the end of his life, started getting into Stoicism. So that's one of the main postmodernists, I think it was Jacques Derrida or Foucault, started getting really into Stoicism towards the end of his life. And it's like, so, and he had some really interesting counterpoints to Jordan Peterson on Stoicism that were like additions, critiques on certain element that Peterson was coming from, and then additions with stuff that Peterson hadn't been aware of about some of these French postmodernists. And I wasn't aware of it until Vervaeke said it. Was a really interesting conversation. And they talked about some of this stuff as well around what Vervaeke called it. So what I'm referring to as transferable knowledge, like episteme or techne, he refers to as propositional knowledge, which is a type of knowledge that's transferable, basically. I can present you my proposition. But then there's other forms of knowledge that he has, 3 other forms as well, like perspectival is another one. And so I'm in this kind of, I actually don't know what the core end result of the postmodern kind of ideas were. And I don't know if they had an end result, because there is truth, I think, or accuracy, maybe more so than truth, because truth is such a laden word, but there is an accuracy to the idea that, because I buy the idea of the axiom of the infinite unknown. Like, to me, that's like my core epistemics. That's my core axiom at the bottom, or postulate at the bottom of my understanding of the objective reality within which my subject experience seems to be occurring.
Yeah, but I think, like, to stop going on the nihilistic route from me on this same point, like, what's the point of it? I view it as all the work I'm doing now is for the collective unconscious, is for the Hindra's net that we talk about in Hinduism, that I am a pixel in a picture. I am here for a purpose, and is to advance and to move forward because it's in our nature. And that's what I view it as. I view my work as the collective consciousness, not for whilst it's self-improvement, the benefit to me along the journey is to keep me entertained and to enjoy it. But knowing that when I go, that I'm leaving something for the greater good. Now, I can't articulate that. That's an eros. That's a feeling. That's something I've always had from a young age. And I feel like everything I do should be for the greater good. And that guides me in my decisions. So that's what, has stopped me going into great depressions or funks, no matter what I've done. That's what stopped me from topping myself. That's what stopped me from, you name it, X, Y, and Z. That's what keeps me on the narrow. That's the push that keeps me going. That's what comes in that keeps me level. And so that stops me going down the nihilistic route that it's all for nothing, because I think that there's more of a collective consciousness. I think we should explore that on another day. I think we have to draw a line here because we need to do something. We're going to run out of time.
I love that just to finish in that concept by that Becker at the end of the Denial of Death, where he says that it's like essentially like what else is there to do but to craft an object or oneself and toss it into the confusion as an offering, so to speak, to the life force.
I think that just sums up exactly what I just said.
Yeah.